Wow, that's an impressive bunch of names and corporations that have come before me. As a leadoff speaker, I'm not sure whether to go for a walk, a bunt, or a hit, but I guarantee you I'm going to get on base somehow. It's good to be back in Salt Lake City. It's sort of like a second home for me. I've spent intermittent periods of time here since 1977, working on such books as A River No More, the Colorado River in the West, of which Utah has its fair share of water. Well, I know you want more, but it's fair at the moment. Sagebrush Country, which uses the Uinta Mountains as a way to explore the use of land in the West, in which every Utah Boy Scout investigates in some way, including Wallace Stegner, who got poisoned, some food poisoning up there when he went up as a young man. Fallout, the tragic story of people in southern Utah, in fact, across the nation, who contracted cancers from the years of atmospheric testing, and where the trial was litigated in Salt Lake City. And most recently, Wallace Stegner in the American West, which why I'm here today. So sort of Salt Lake and Utah for me has been a nexus, and I look forward to coming back here in the near future and working on a biography of Everett Roos, a person who's fascinated me for a number of years and whose life, I have to emphasize this, not only took place, actually his death took place somewhere in Utah, but his life began in California, where I live. So that'll be an interesting exploration. Roos's promising short life was the antithesis of Wallace Stegner's long, full life. By the way, both were in Utah at the same time. Wally was just beginning his teaching stint at the university, and Everett was departing Escalante for the unknown. Connections? In Mormon country, Wallace Stegner compared Roos to John Muir, and I would like to say that Stegner advanced both Roos's and Muir's wilderness visions. He was responsible for having their ideas codified into law through his wondrous wilderness letter. It's my job to give you an overview of Wallace Stegner's life and times into which you can fit what follows at this conference. I see myself as prologue. Wallace Stegner's life could be described as a continuous search for the angle of repose. Stegner was a man of many different and seemingly contradictory components. He was a gentleman. His consideration was legendary. His anger was implacable. He lived according to an inflexible code forged on the frontier, tempered during the Depression years, and never subsequently bent or broken to fit the changing times. Stegner was a good man, but he was not the perfect man he was eulogized as being. He came from nowhere culturally and became a writer whose books were translated into numerous foreign languages. He was a barefoot frontier youth who later consorted with the intellectual elite in this and other countries. He worked exceedingly hard and lived a full, rich life. His transgressions were minor. Although he spent a lifetime seeking knowledge of himself on paper, he never felt as secure within himself as he seemed on the surface. He was captive to the guilt and anger that had its roots in childhood. As a student for the master's degree in an innovative writing program, and a professor with a doctorate degree in a recognized academic specialty, both from the University of Utah, a teacher in the top writing programs in the country, Iowa, Breadloaf, Harvard, and Stanford, and a writer of volumes of commercially published fiction and nonfiction, Stegner not only bridged the gap between professor and professional writer, but he's also constructed by example and teaching the tenuous structure that allowed many others to cross that same chasm. He was simply unclassifiable, and like rainfall in the desert, he made the American West come alive for many thousands of readers. For other writers, like myself, Stegner validated the West as a subject in the minds of Eastern publishers, who were located in what he somewhat derogatorily called headquarters, meaning the Boston, New York publishing axis. He was a man of many parts, 4 of which are easily distinguishable. If you asked me, I couldn't say which piece was the most important. But all of them together added up to the single most important interpreter of what we call the Western experience, which really is not limited to the West, as he would have pointed out if he were here. And I really do feel that he's hovering somewhere in this room, so we have to watch our steps. But is applicable elsewhere. The 4 parts are: 1, teacher. Wallace Stegner taught writing students whose names have come to constitute a virtual hall of fame of American letters. Edward Abbey, Wendell Berry, Ken Kesey, Larry McMurtry, Robert Stone, and Scott Turow are just a few. Barry Lopez, Ivan Doig, and Terry Tempest Williams knew him more informally. There are other writers of note who were influenced by Wally, some of whom are in this room. And then there are the students who wrote little or nothing after taking his courses, but took the time to thank him years later. I think that's the ultimate compliment for a teacher. 2, he had a decided impact on such national conservation issues as dams, wilderness areas, and national parks. Stegner defined place in words and actions, the latter activity being a rare characteristic for writers. He stressed the realities of the West in classroom lectures, speeches, his writings, and his environmental activities. He was a slayer of myths about this outsized land. Rapacious economic booms followed by inevitable busts, the need for wilderness and national parks to renew the spirit, and the concept of aridity that defines the West were topics Stegner introduced to national audiences through his writings and conservation activities. 3, he was a versatile writer of journalism, literary essays, short stories, novels, biographies, and histories. My gosh, what else? By actual count, 13 novels, 9 nonfiction books, 242 nonfiction articles, and 37 short stories. He garnered almost all the awards and honors available in a lifetime: Pulitzer Prize, National Book Award, 2 Guggenheim Fellowships, a Penn West Freedom to Write Award, 8 honorary degrees, and endowed chairs named after him at 2 Western universities, among other more prosaic forms of recognition. 4, Stegner was the spokesperson for the region. No single person has filled that position since his death. Through his multiple legacies, Wallace Stegner remains the emeritus authority on the American West. I was born on wheels, Wally said. I know the excitement of newness and the relief when responsibility has been left behind. But I also know the dissatisfaction and hunger that results from placelessness. Placelessness was what his family and many of the characters in his novels suffered from. The antidote to placelessness is finding one's angle of repose. Actually, that's something I think we all try to do to some extent. The title of his best-known work. What follows is the Stegner Trail from 1909 to 1993, with certain works cited as autobiographical references for specific periods. Born in Iowa on February 18, 1909, Mother Hilda, Father George, also known as Beau in his novels. Older brother Cecil, loves his mother, hates his father, looks up to his athletic brother, who dies at an early age. If you go up to the city cemetery in Salt Lake City, you'll see gravestones for his brother and his mother, nothing for his father. He never could reconcile his feeling of anger for his father and what he perceived his father's carelessness, thoughtlessness toward his mother, who he loved and who he loved obsessively, as he admitted. But those feelings of love and anger were feelings he tried to exorcise through his works, never quite achieved it, but he tried, and that's all you can ask someone to do. We all have our devils and our angels, I would add, or I should say, at least I do. I should speak only for myself, and you can take it from there. Okay, so the family travels to Puget Sound, and that's where his first memories kick in. In a tent in Redmond, now the headquarters for Microsoft, and I hate to think of the differences in the terrain. His mother running a cafe while his father tries to figure out how to get rich quick. His father takes off. We're not quite sure where, possibly for the Klondike Gold Rush, or maybe to the wheat fields in the East End, Saskatchewan. Wally's first memories are of an orphanage in Salt Lake City, in Seattle, where his mother had to put him and his brother because she was working in the department store and couldn't take care of him. So he and his brother were there for 4 months. And he writes about it in Big Rock Candy Mountain, the bread crusts that he had to fight for because he was skinny, scrawny crybaby, and sometimes his brother, who was big and athletic, would get him a piece of bread. It was not a happy experience, and I wasn't sure what the name of that orphanage was, nor had anyone tracked it by it until I talked with Lynn Stegner, and she told me that, in fact, she and Wally, Lynn being Wally's daughter-in-law, had been in the same orphanage, different times, but they both hated tomato sandwiches. I happen to love them. Again, you write from your own perspective, and you look at lives from your own perspective, and there's no one truth. There are many truths, and you just hope that the writer is fairly responsible. I'm trying to be responsible today. So, on to East End, Saskatchewan, which really forms him. This is the frontier. There's nothing there when he arrives. It's dirt, it's mud. They live in a railroad car. His father cobbles together a house, files on a homestead. His father works as a gambler and a bootlegger. And in the summers, the family travels out from East End, which is practically the same as it was in the early years in 1912 through 1920 when the family's there. It's a beautiful place on the prairie by the Frenchman River. He swims in the river in the summer when he gets back from the homestead in the early fall months, and he skates on it in the winter. And he does various kid escapades, gets great marks in school. And then this family goes out to this bleak homestead right on the U.S. border on the Canadian side. And Wally never goes back there. It was failure. The family failed there. And I found it through the help of a former geological survey employee who tracked down the filing for it. And with the help of a rancher, and his wife, the GPS, we tracked it down, and the rancher, who had a great deal of experience, could show me on the part of the 160 acres where there were faint indentation of not only a wagon trail, but also the rows of wheat. The wheat didn't last, the boom went bust. George kept after that boom, which never really happened, and he had a more lucrative career both in Saskatchewan and Great Falls and Salt Lake City as a bootlegger. So the family goes on to Great Falls in Montana. It's 1920, and there's more opportunity for bootlegging in Great Falls. No one, and it's so different from Salt Lake City. No one in Great Falls, Montana is aware that the family lived there for more than a year. There's nothing in any historical society about the Stegners. But he lives sort of under the radar because he has this illicit activity going on. And this is where Wally encounters civilization. He's never seen a green lawn before. He's never seen a flush toilet, and he has some coins that he stuffs into an electrical outlet, and we almost lost Wallace Stegner at that point. So he goes to school in this dumb Canadian frontier outfit, and needless to say, he starts on the wrong foot, and he's not accepted, and he's made fun of in Great Falls, but soon the family, after a year or so, moves on to Salt Lake City. And it's the first time coming from Great Falls to Montana to Salt Lake City that he encounters mountains and running water and the sound of mountain water. A title of one of his better short story collections, I think, is a sound that starts there and travels with him through his life. He gets to Salt Lake City, and what he didn't find in Great Falls, he finds here in abundance eventually, and that's acceptance. You know, the family moves a lot because George has sort of a moving profession. But Wally starts playing tennis, starts playing basketball at East High School, does a little writing there for the yearbook, I think, starts drinking, starts chasing girls. Boy, did he like the girls. Comes to the University of Utah, gets accepted in a fraternity. His buddies start drinking one night and in a car come down the steps of the state capitol and have to fix a flat tire, and they can't really do it right, but they somehow do it. The family has a summer home down in Fish Lake, so he encounters the plateau and the canyonlands of southern Utah for a first time, and just has a wonderful experience at the high school and the university, and goes on to the University of Iowa, gets the second master's degree in creative writing, where what's arguably perhaps the best graduate school of creative writing now, Iowa School of Writers. Just starting, he's at the very start of the concept of teaching creative writing, as you can learn how to write novels by teaching. And then he's told by his professor, look, you don't want to take a doctorate degree in this, no one will hire you. Take it in English. He does. He comes back to the University of Utah in 1934. It's a different experience. He feels unappreciated. He gets a literary prize. I'm not sure if the prize comes within 24 hours of Page's birth, or Page is born and then the prize starts, but Page can straighten that out. But the two events are very close together, but he's not appreciated here. He can't get tenure. He can't get a raise. It's the Depression. So he goes on to the University of Wisconsin, where he encounters that academic view that if you write something that's published commercially, you're not really an academic, and you can't really get credits. He always trots this line, this line between the academic world and needing and wanting to generate some income, and he never quite gets accepted by the academics, but he does get read by a large audience. All through his whole teaching year, experience. His time is divided half between teaching and half writing. He only teaches half his time. So from the University of Wisconsin, he gets his big break. But he just sneaks in through a vacancy at the Breadloaf Writers Conference in 1938. And there he meets the Eastern writers, editors, and publishers who are going to help him. Bernard DeVoto, Robert Frost, all the big names go to Breadloaf in the summer, and he begins teaching there that he carries on for a number of summers. This is a wonderful story of his watching Robert Frost trying to deal with another poet who was giving a lecture. Robert Frost was not the most gracious of people, but Robert Frost and Wallace Stegner take long walks at night and talk about literature. And then from there he goes to Harvard, and he teaches there during the summer, during the winter for 4 or 5 years, gets an assignment from Look magazine to do a long series of articles on racism. This is near the end of World War II, and Look, and I guess the country itself thinks we're going to get rid of racism. We're going to confront this problem now. It's a wonderful time to do this. So they commission him. He travels around the country, and he produces this marvelous book. And if there's any of you here, individuals or foundations, that want to do a great credit to Wallace Stegner and to this country, you would reprint One Nation. It's never been reprinted. It's an incredible book that is early in the literature on the civil rights. Not only is it incredible in terms of what the topic it deals with, but in the way it does. It doesn't take the usual way that you get into such a topic, the Eastern-centric way, where you start with the blacks and you work your way west to find out what other stray minorities might be. He starts in the West with the Filipinos, the Chinese, the Japanese, the American Indians, and he works his way east. And it's not only unique, but the whole topic is unique at that time. It's not called civil rights. It's called something else. Now, if you're in this room and you really want to pursue this, Carl Brandt right here, the agent for the Stegner estate, will give you some clue as to the tangled rights to that book. But I really would urge someone in this room to take that up. So from Breadloaf, he meets a Stanford professor, Edith Merlis, who gets him into Stanford. I won't tell you about, well, he was first interviewed for a job at Mills, and Remembering Laughter is his wonderful first novel. And it's not, no, they didn't like it here either because, it's a ménage à trois, a wonderful one. And the people at Mills thought that novel wasn't the best way to introduce Wallace Stegner literature to all the young ladies who went there. So that was fortunate for him. So he goes on to Stanford, where he teaches from 1945 to 1970. And through a break, he gets breaks, and he comes here and gives a lecture and says, my career was a number of breaks. Well, he got breaks, but he worked hard too, and he made his own breaks. So the break he got there was the brother of the chairman of the English department was a Texas oilman who liked literature, and he endowed this creative writing program. And that's how the creative writing program at Stanford started, and started generating all these incredible writers. Now, yes, the oilman had money, but Stegner had the program. And Stegner was helped, and I can't remember his name, by somebody else who came from Utah. Anyone remember his name? His deputy, what? Right, Scowcroft, right, whose father used to buy liquor from Stegner's father. There's a tie-in there. Yeah, see, we're all tied here. So Scowcroft really helps him because Wally takes off half the time, travels a lot, starts writing the books. The 1960s occur, the late 1960s is a different time. He's not attuned to change. He comes from a place, East End, which is sort of changeless. There's this whole denigration, this actual physical destruction of a great university. The Plywood University calls it. The windows are knocked out. The kids come to class and take over. It's not something that he likes. It's not something that he can deal with. And so he says, I'm out of here. He's out of here because of Carl Brandt's mother getting a 6-book contract, which will equal the pay that he's got at Stanford. And in 1971, Angle of Repose is published, and from there, The Spectator Bird and any number of books begin flowing from his typewriter as he types with 2 fingers because he's missing an index finger on a manual typewriter, one of which is in special collections, but there are others which broke down before this one. And he was a very frugal man. He typed on both sides of a piece of paper. He typed with elite type with the tabs as far as they would extend. I mean, how else would you type if you were brought up in the Depression? And he gathered twigs, and he used the twigs to start the fire in his studio every morning after warming up on the typewriter with a cigar. Disciplined man, worked 7 days a week. It's the only way you can produce all those books, and still teach, and still travel, and still have a family. So the family in 1938 goes to Greensboro, Vermont, where they stay with the Grays, who are the characters in Crossing to Safety. They fall in love with Greensboro, and they buy some acreage there. That doesn't quite work out, and they buy some acreage closer to the actual Caspian Lake. And this is where the Stegners spend most of their summers. He writes about it in Second Growth, and it's also in Crossing to Safety. You get a good indication of what it's like. And near the end of his life, this geography of hope, of all the work and all the time and all the conservation activities that he's put in, the West is now the land of despair, and he despairs over what's happened in the late 1980s and early 1990s. And for him, it's the landscape of New England, the incredible growth, the vegetation that occurs. It's not the tracks that you can still see in the desert. It's the reverence of history. It's families being there year after year. It's code of behavior that attracts him, and he gives up on the West. And although he can't live in Vermont all his life, this becomes the land where he has his ashes scattered when he dies after an automobile accident in 1993. Finally, on February 18th of this year, the New York Times newspaper ran a column admitting that it had done him wrong by not reviewing his prize-winning novels. It was a wonderful column by Timothy Egan. And when the Times did comment on his prizes at the time in the 1970s, it said that he didn't deserve them. I think of it as successive stabs in the back. And he had thick armor. It did get through him and prick him every once in a while, but he rebounded, as every writer has to. But the subsequent outpouring of more than 300 mostly laudatory comments, which still can be accessed if you go to Timothy Egan's blog site, are an incredible testimony to who Wallace Stegner is, how he's revered today. I couldn't think of any better testimony. And in ending this talk, I'd like to read just one comment. I think this is 313. It's by Amy Isler Gibson. I don't know where she lives. I once dated a man who shared my love of reading. I liked him very much, but I was pretty sure he was not the one. One day, his friend drove him by my apartment where he placed Wallace Stegner's book, Crossing to Safety, at my front door without comment, but friends had seen him. Without another word or date between us, I took the book with me to visit family in California. By the time I had read to the middle, my heart, like the West, I suppose, was won. We will celebrate our 18th wedding anniversary this fall and have 3 amazing boys. A man who revered Wallace Stegner was a man I could share my life with. He remains my truest friend and love. And here she doesn't specify whether it's Stegner or her husband. Happy birthday, Wallace. So I'll be glad in the remaining minutes that I have to answer any questions that you might have.
What would you say were his main weaknesses that you discovered as you were researching his life?
I can't get the noun.
The weaknesses, his weaknesses. As a person, and how did he overcome them?
Okay, yes. Well, no, he did. And when I approached Page, that's a good one, saying I want to do a biography, he said he didn't want another hagiography. He had a temper. He never forgave Ken Kesey for dissing him. He never forgave a number of people who crossed his path. That was one. I question what he did during World War II. He had a family, but he was offered 2 high-paying jobs in civilian, in the military. In Washington. What I haven't mentioned, I think, is what most people who are knowledgeable about his work would bring up, and which I spend a great deal of space in my book about, and that's the issue of plagiarism involved in Angle of Repose. So I think those are minor transgressions, but you can go either way on the plagiarism issue. The reason I brought it up was for you to have all the facts in complete a form as possible. So, as I said, he was a gentleman, but no gentleman I know, including my father, to whom I dedicated this book, who was the best gentleman I ever knew, is perfect. Another question? Back there.
What do you think Stegner's legacy will be? Do you think that he's too complex as a writer to appeal to youth engaged in text messaging and overwhelmed by the media?
I think his legacy will be the legacy that each individual takes from reading him. And I wouldn't want to dictate any one legacy. Now, whether people read books in the future, 100 years from now, they will in some form. They won't be the present form. Whether they have the concentration, the mind to deal with anything but short snippets, I imagine they will, or there will be enough of them. And I imagine, in fact, I know that Wallace Stegner will survive. It was on acid-free paper, and it'll be in some different form in the future. Any other questions? Yes.
I was wondering if you crossed in your research any more about his relationship to Glen Canyon, how that contributed to his environmental ethic, or any kind of feelings that or a special place that he held in his heart for Glen Canyon?
Sure. Well, he knew what David Brower and the Sierra Club didn't know, because he had gone down the river through Glen Canyon before there was a dam there, what that place was like. And he warned Dave Brower and the Sierra Club. They didn't pay attention. And the trade-off for a dam, Glen Canyon Dam, was no dam in Dinosaur National Monument. And David Brower said that was one of the greatest mistakes he made in his life. And that was one of the most prescient comments that Wallace Stegner made. So we had this wonderful trip. Paige and Lynn and Allison, my son, and some folks from the Glen Canyon Institute in Salt Lake City on this decrepit pontoon craft that almost sank, in which the Park Service rangers, because it did belong to Glen Canyon Institute, really hassled us on up through Lake Powell, where we camped at the mouth of Davis Gulch, which actually was where Everett Roos disappeared. And there was inscribed the word, I think it was Dean. It was really chiseled in there. I have to go back and look at the book. In any case, I thought that rang a bell, and so I went back and looked up and Beyond the Hunter Meridian, and sure, that was one of the three people who left at Separation Rapids, the Powell trip. Now, whether that was the same Dean, I think that was the last name, I have no way of knowing, but I'd like to think again that there was this cycle, this circle had been completed. So Stegner said, in terms of that country down there, sometime this should be a national park or a national monument. And in fact, Bill Clinton, with the help of Bruce Babbitt, who may or may not be in this room, made it the Grand Staircase Escalante National Monument. I think it should be the Wallace Stegner National Park. And I think you people in Utah should not only put One Nation back into print, but should get your congressional delegation to back that proposal. I think I have a few more minutes. If there are any other
One more question.
One more question.
I'm sorry.
Work of Wallace Stegner's, particularly you like and enjoy his literary and histories and biographies?
Actually, Paige and I were on another. With the Commonwealth Club in San Francisco on February 18th, and I came up with Remembering Laughter, because you all know the others, and you don't know that as well. I think Wolf Willows is a wonderful combination of nonfiction and fiction. I want to just tell a brief story. Wally went back to East End, his only trip there in 1953 with Mary. He really felt full of guilt in terms of who his father was, the bootlegging activity and so forth, and so he disguised himself. He was Mr. Page. And he wrote Page Stegner letters in terms of care of the Grays in Vermont. And he left after a week after acquiring material for what became Wolf Willow. And one of the local historians wrote him later and said, we really thought that was you, but your father was a funny guy. He told a lot of jokes down at the old garage here, and you shouldn't have been as guilty as you were. But he carried this with him for a long time, and he's giving this lecture, I think it's at the University of Iowa, 1938, and his friend comes up to him on the platform and says, I have some terrible news. Your father just died. And his father died, it must have been a traumatic experience for Wally, and this after killing his girlfriend and then shooting himself in a flea bag hotel in Salt Lake. He had to come back. And for 3 days, if you read the Deseret News and the Tribune, there's nothing but, the Stegner killing. Imagine his son coming back and facing that. Again, it's difficult. But these are the things he surmounted, and not only surmounted, but dealt with. Not entirely successfully, but he dealt with them. So I think I'll end on that note. Thank you very much.